When we think about survival, we usually picture this frantic, short-term struggle against the elements, right? But what happens when survival isn't a sprint, but a marathon that goes on for years? Well, let's dive into this incredible story that totally redefines what it really means to endure.
Think about the stories you've heard. They're almost always these intense, dramatic dashes for survival, and we measure them in hours, or maybe a few really awful days. That's kind of our baseline, you know? It's what we expect survival to look like.
And then, you get the more extreme cases, the ones that really push human limits over several weeks. We think of those as these legendary tales of endurance. But the story we're looking at today, it goes so much further than that. That's right, years. This is not a story about just being tough or catching a lucky break. No way. This is a story about logic, about discipline, and about the power of building systems. And to really get it, we have to completely change how we think about survival itself.
So how in the world did this all start? Well, like a lot of disasters, it began with a whole bunch of things going wrong all at once during a massive storm at sea, leaving a large group of people stranded in the absolute middle of nowhere.
I mean, everything that could go wrong pretty much did. The storm just destroyed their navigation and shoved them completely off course. Their communication gear went from spotty to totally useless. By the time they actually had to evacuate the vessel, they were so far from any known shipping lanes that a quick rescue was just off the table. They made it to land, but it was an empty, remote island. They were completely, totally alone.
In a moment of pure crisis like that, what you do in those first 48 hours can literally make or break you. And instead of panicking, this group immediately zeroed in on the absolute fundamentals. And that set the stage for everything that came next.
This is like the universal playbook for survival. And notice what's right there at the top: water. Dehydration can mess with your ability to think clearly in less than a day. So what's amazing here is that their first big win was just systematically tackling these three things in order. No thinking about the long term yet, just stabilizing the here and now.
And this is the core lesson of their whole story. Their long-term survival wasn't about some individual hero or just raw strength. It was about something way more powerful: building smart, repeatable systems for every single thing they needed.
So what do we even mean by a system? Well, think of it like this. It's the difference between one person just randomly looking for water every day versus having a dedicated team whose daily job is to collect, purify, and store it. A system takes all that chaotic, random effort and turns it into a reliable, predictable result.
And one of the biggest game changers for them was the system they built around fire. Before they figured out how to create and keep a fire going 24/7, they were just living hand to mouth. Every single day was a mad scramble for food. But after they had fire, they could cook, smoke, and preserve food. They went from just daily survival to stored survival, and that let them actually plan for the future.
And they didn't just have systems for things. They had a system for people. They created these rotating task groups, which made sure every critical job got done consistently. This was genius because it prevented burnout, but just as important, it cut down on conflict, which is one of the biggest killers in long-term group survival. Frankly, it's a killer in any high-stakes team project. This right here is such a powerful idea. For this group, signaling for help wasn't something they did when they felt hopeful. It was a chore. It was a job. It was a system. They kept those smoke signals going and maintained shoreline markers every single day, whether they felt good about it or not. It was that disciplined consistency, not their mood, that ended up making all the difference.
But as they started getting their physical needs under control, a new and maybe even more dangerous threat started to creep in. The biggest challenge they faced was no longer out there in the environment. It was inside their own heads.
So just think about that for a second. They've got water, they've got food, they've got shelter. What on earth could be the biggest danger at this point?
It wasn't hunger, or the weather, or getting injured. It was the crushing psychological weight of just not knowing. Not knowing if rescue was ever going to come, not knowing how long this was all going to last. The source material is so clear on this. That kind of uncertainty is way harder to endure than physical hardship.
This is what led to this really profound mental shift. They basically stopped just waiting around to be saved and started actively building a life. They went from thinking, when is this going to end, to asking, how do we live a good life, right here, right now? That acceptance, that was the key to their long-term mental toughness.
So how did they fight back against that poison of uncertainty? With routine. They filled their days with purpose, fixed schedules for tasks, sharing meals together, even teaching each other new skills. That structure became their psychological armor. See, idle time lets fear and despair grow. Routine starves them of oxygen.
And that brings us to the end of their story. But it's so important to understand that their rescue wasn't just some random stroke of luck. It was the direct, logical result of the systems they had so patiently built and maintained. The source material puts this perfectly. Rescue was not an accident. It was an outcome. They didn't just get lucky. They literally created the conditions for their own rescue through years of disciplined, systematic work.
And here's exactly how it went down. A passing ship saw things that just don't belong in nature. Shoreline markers that looked man-made, and more importantly, those persistent smoke signals they had kept up day after day after day. It wasn't a single signal that did it. It was the consistency. That's what screamed intelligent life and made the crew to check it out. Their system had worked.
So, what are the big takeaways from this incredible story? Well, they're really powerful and, honestly, kind of counterintuitive. In a crisis, having clear priorities is way better than just panicking. A reliable structure will always beat fleeting motivation. A daily routine is a much stronger shield than fragile hope. And the discipline of the group will always outperform the strength of any one person.
Ultimately, what this story teaches us is that real long-term survival isn't about being the toughest person out there. It's about being the most organized. It's about building intelligent systems that create predictable results in a completely unpredictable world. And that leaves us with a question that applies far beyond a remote island, doesn't it? What are the critical systems that you're building in your own life?